So we left off in Yemen. Third wave begins, inspired by Anwar al-Awlaki, American-born radical cleric who started as a propagandist and moves into the operational side of things. Why does AQAP, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, as the Yemeni group is known, present such a threat to the United States? You would think, okay, a couple of bomb plots targeted at airplanes, but aren't they also focused on a local fight? I mean, where do they come down, and why do we spend so much time worrying about them now?
Well, especially by 2009 and then into 2010, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula was doing both. It was trying to expand its sanctuary in Yemen, in places like Shabwa Governorate, where it had established some training camps in the mountains around the Gulf of Aden. And also, it had some individuals like Awlaki, like Samir Khan, who were interested in targeting the United States, and who had some volunteers who were willing to do that. So that mixture was potentially concerning, especially if they could get people and inspire them to do it. So
targeting was almost part of their recruiting process too, for their overall organization.
Oh, I think there's no question. And so, I mean, encouraging individuals like Major Hassan, the Fort Hood shooter, and this is a great propaganda victory for them, because they could actually take someone who was an American soldier and had doubts about it. He was about to be deployed to Afghanistan, had doubts about being a Muslim in the U.S. Army, and it could use that killing at Fort Hood as an example of instability within what they called the enemy, and it was a way to show that they were getting some inroads within the United States. It looks to me that Awlaki was not directly involved in the operational component, but was certainly involved through email contacts in helping inspire him to do that. So both targeting directly, but also inspiring individuals, they became a serious threat. And then we saw that a year or so later with the plot that was attempted to put explosive devices into printer cartridges.
So cargo planes bound for the U.S.
In cargo planes, that's exactly right. And what's interesting with Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, probably better than any other Al-Qaeda affiliate by this time, is they were really innovative. The bomb that they established for the Christmas Day bomber, 2009, was again one that they figured out how to get it undetected at airports because it had no metal components. And they had tested that bomb, and it had worked.
So these were the plastic explosives that were sewn into Omar Farouk Abdul Muttalib's underwear.
Correct.
And the only reason it didn't work is the ignition didn't quite go off, right?
Correct. And I'm not a bomb expert, and it's not entirely clear to me why. I know that with at least one, maybe even two test cases, that bomb had actually gone off. They tested it in Yemen. I don't know if it was there was a decent amount of time between when he had been given it, and he went a circuitous route from Yemen through Africa, stayed for a period of time in Nigeria, then went to Amsterdam, and then the U.S. I mean, that was part of the instructions from Awlaki was to avoid detection as much as possible. And if you go through these multiple locations, you stay for a prolonged time in Nigeria, where he was from, that he would avoid detection, which he was. But that may have actually then had an impact on the purity of the ingredients, the powdered ingredients within his underwear bomb. But that innovation of thinking of how to thwart security, and how they've been thinking even since then about ways to thwart security processes through body cavity bombs.
Like used by one of the AQAP bombers to try to target a member of the Saudi royal family.
Exactly. But even more recent plans that they have been playing around with, putting bombs in cameras or other items that could be brought onto an airplane as part of your luggage that you don't have to check in, your carry-on.
So you're saying they have, the reason AQAP is the face of the third wave for you is because they have the means to go with the aspirations to carry some of this stuff out. And it sounds like they're still recruiting. That's what I keep hearing, that Yemen is becoming a place that's a real draw for foreign fighters.
That's right.
So
well, and in addition to that, when the Arab Spring begins to spread, they also get a government that begins to weaken, and they get a government that also is involved in multiple insurgencies within Yemen. So, I mean, in a sense, as they improve and increase their operational capabilities, they get a weakening government that has multiple insurgencies that it has to deal with, and that helps facilitate and allow them to spread that sanctuary.
Now, there was a bit of a debate going on, though, between AQAP leaders and Osama bin Laden before he died about which way to go with that fight. Can you walk us through that?
Well, I mean, my reading of this is bin Laden, and some of this has not been really discussed a lot publicly, but bin Laden did have some concerns about several of its affiliates in focusing too much on the wars in the countries they were operating in. So focusing too much on Yemen. Right. And actually, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula was probably less of a concern for him than was the Islamic Maghreb or Iraq. In Africa or in Iraq, because Al-Qaeda in Yemen was at least looking overseas to conduct attacks. Several of the other affiliates were doing very little activity outside of their own countries, and he apparently sent several letters out to affiliates where he said, remember, we need to attack the United States, so don't get so bogged down in fighting in Somalia, in North Africa, in Iraq, and in Yemen that you forget the far enemy, that's the United States. So part of what bin Laden was also trying to do is encourage them not just to spread within their own countries, which was important, but also to continue to focus on the U.S.
Now, that sort of brings us to Afghanistan, which was the start of this fight, was bin Laden's sanctuary, and is currently where tens of thousands of U.S. forces are still battling it out. Where did the fight on the ground in Afghanistan go from being the right war to something that helped inspire these waves of violence?
Well, I think one factor was the decision to go big in Afghanistan, which is actually less, in my view, a counterinsurgency issue, but to go big with large numbers of forces and to focus on the central government as really the only actor involved. So I would say through 2007 and 8, and even for most of 2009, the focus in Afghanistan was deploying increasingly larger numbers of American forces.
And the problem with that is?
Well, in my view, there is, among other things, there is variation in the competence of American forces to do this kind of stuff. I would say you certainly have a special operations component that's trained for this kind of counterinsurgency, irregular warfare.
Working with locals on the ground, working in small numbers.
That's right. And I would say you got variations in the quality of conventional forces in talking a counterinsurgency game, but still trying to fight this almost like a conventional war, living in, not in local villages, but living primarily in fire bases, occasionally going out and conducting operations. But it was one where I think was largely isolated. And the second part of it is also assuming that the answer was really to build up large numbers of national security forces.
In Afghanistan?
In Afghanistan, Afghan National Army and Police. Well, I would say historically, and even if you go back to 2001, when you get into rural areas, I would say very strongly there is no history, recent history, say the last 100 years, where local communities have ever established security because of permanent presence by central government forces. Yet that was our answer for several years, to push out police permanently into rural areas. We didn't have enough. Many locals didn't want them. So I think you push those things